Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be in Bulgaria. It's my first time. As you said, the Swiss cooperation program is very active here in Bulgaria, and you see all these posters outside. I'm sure that some of you are actually much more familiar with that than I am. I'm actually part of the global cooperation of SDGs, so I work on the multilateral side of things. I've been very involved in negotiations of the Agenda 2030. I work on financing for development, and just as a bit of context, SDC is a classic development actor. So we are very much focused on poorer countries. A lot of our work is in Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. We work a lot in fragile countries. So this is also part of our work, and then of course the work we do here in the region with the new EU member countries. So it's a challenge to add anything to already this rich discussion that we had, but what I want to focus on is very much what does this all mean for development agencies like SDC? What, how can we contribute to this greening of the economy? And our framework, of course, are the SDGs. And actually, when I looked at the program of this conference, I didn't see the SDG very prominently. So I was actually going to ask the audience here who has heard of the SDGs, just like Philip does in the schools in Italy, but I'm not worried about that anymore. I think we've heard and seen enough of the SDGs, so I'm going to be very quick going through them. So, oh no, that's the laser pointer. Here we go. So, there's sort of 3 steps to my presentation. First, I'm going to talk about the 2030 agenda and how it changes international development cooperation. And again, I'm going to be relatively quick here. Then moving to finance, which is the main topic of this discussion, and then talk also a little bit about partnerships. Since I was told that this is something of particular interest also to this group, how do we work in particular with the private sector? Because that's actually one of my focus areas. So very quickly, a paradigm shift, and we've heard that. So when we went from the MDGs, which had very specific and very limited goals on very specific sectors like education and health, to this transformation to the SDGs and to really look at sustainable development in a much broader sense and to fight the underlying causes of non-development rather than just the symptoms. And of course, this was also the first time that you can see it here, the planet was introduced to this framework. So as we heard already, this is really a monumental shift. But it also means it's a monumental shift for the way agencies like mine work, because we were traditional development assistance providers, using money from the north to finance projects in the south or the east. And so this much more broader set of development framework also had a lot of challenges for us. Challenges in the sense, and this is the second time you see the slide, that's how good this graph is. Challenges, of course, because it's a universal agenda, so that means for a country like Switzerland, it's not only relevant to our development work, where we have, in the past focused on this part, helping poorer countries increase economic growth and increase their living standards, their social progress, and so on and so forth. But now we're also faced with these countries, including our own, meaning how can we sustain the current economic model and the current economic well-being by not abusing the planet as much as we do today. So this is really sort of the fundamental challenge that we all face. It's also an integrated agenda, and I actually thought maybe 10 years ago it wouldn't have been possible to have a panel where UNESCO and EBRD are sitting on the same panel talking about finance. I don't know, maybe you have known each other for 10 years, then I apologize. But this is so these are the SDGs. Each of the colored dots are the SDGs, and the smaller dots are the targets. And what you can see here is how many targets from one SDG relate to targets of other SDGs. So for example, if you look here, it's number 1.5, I think, which relates to both poverty and climate change, which really is to say you cannot address one issue without addressing the other. And that also, for us as development actors, of course, means we get out of this silo approach and really look at more multidimensional ways of addressing sustainable development. Now let's get to more to the topic. How can this agenda be implemented? And here, of course, we've already heard a lot of international agreements today. One that I haven't heard is here in the middle, the Third International Conference on Financing for Development, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, and that is very much sort of the guidebook for development actors, how to implement the 2030 agenda. And these pictures, sorry, they were supposed to come in one after the other, so the effect is not as strong, but what these pictures are supposed to say is really that this is an agenda that has to be implemented by all of us. So we have here the ministries are representing the governments who are in the driving force, so the driver's seats. Then we have multinational development actors, including new actors. We have private finance, and we have classic sort of development assistance. So these all have to come together in sort of an overarching framework on implementing this agenda. So how do we deal with that? And again, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which was agreed by all countries, and so far nobody has pulled out, is really the guidebook, and there's sort of three overarching ways with which it says the 2030 agenda can be implemented. The first one is private investment, and here obviously the EBRD can speak much better about it than me, but so this is starting from the fact that these are estimates on how much the SDGs would cost or how much investment would be required in each of these sectors. These are billions of US dollars, and as you can see, these are estimates from the literature, so they're quite wide, but yet the amounts are of course huge. If you look at the overall ODA in the world is about 130 billion US dollars, that wouldn't even be enough to finance just one SDG on energy. Oh, that was too fast? Oh, no. But of course, the flip side of that is that there's also never been more capital available, and because so this is an overview from the IMF on capital under management, and so there's massive amounts of capital available. These are trillions, and but it's all private. Most of it is private capital, and it all sits sort of managed by a handful of asset managers, mostly pension funds, insurance funds, and other institutional investors. So the big challenge here is really how can some of this private money be channeled into SDG sectors. And we heard both the OECD and the EBRD. I mean, they of course think about this much more than we do. One way we look at it is sort of, okay, what are the instruments that are available to a development actor like ourselves? And we can decide, this is a bit like the operationalization of the framework that we have seen before. So we can look at finance, and this is very much where actors like the EBRD and other multilateral development banks have been for a long time. We heard about green bonds this morning, blended finance. So this is really how can the risk-return profile of investments be adjusted that it's worth for private investors investing in the SDGs. We, as a small development agency, we look in some sort of specific sub-sectors. We work a lot on impact investing, for example, so that's investment with an intentional social or environmental impact. There's tools like social impact tools that help get more results out of development programs. And there's all sorts of different instruments that I think we'll hear more about in the afternoon. The second way we can work is with businesses and trying to influence business behavior. We support a lot of initiatives such as the OECD guidelines, but the UN Global Compact, integrated reporting, and so on. So this is really trying to get business to get on board with the idea of sustainable development. And personally, I actually think this is where a lot of the potential lies, because at the moment it sometimes almost seems as though business would be more proactive and more willing to step up than some countries, especially very big ones. And then in the middle, this should be bigger, this arrow, because and we heard a bit in the earlier presentation about that. This is about sort of keeping the rules of the game as they are, but nudging the system, not nudging the system here and there. But if we really want a big change, we probably should change the rules of the game. And there's a lot of solutions that you all know much better than I do. Carbon pricing, of course, something Switzerland has supported for a long time. More transparency in asset allocation, and so on and so forth, and to really build in sustainability in each and every investment decision. It's about full cost calculation of investments. I mean, we all know that from the energy sector where we have hugely distorted markets. So anyway, so this is really where probably the biggest the biggest challenges lie, and where we as an agency are maybe not so much needed because of our money, but where we are really working on the policy level. We are very active supporting initiatives like the UNEP inquiry into the financial system we need, and many others try to liaise with the G20 and so on and so forth. So this is really where a lot of our focus on the global level is as well. So that's one part of the puzzle of implementing the 2030 agenda. A second part is supporting countries generate their own resources. These are just a relatively random set of countries of different income level and their tax to GDP ratio. There's been a lot of catch-up in the last 10 years, and that middle and low-income countries have increased their tax to GDP ratio to generate their own resources to finance their own sustainable development, and there's been a call to support these countries more. For Switzerland, this isn't very new. We have supported revenue mobilization mechanisms in many countries, including in this region, for a long time. We are also of the opinion that collecting revenues is not enough. It's about how you spend them in an efficient, transparent, and equitable way. So this is a big part of our development cooperation work moving forward as well, and a lot of other development actors are doing the same thing. And then the third puzzle part remains what we do. So we hopefully have still a raison d'être in the future, which is ODA, because there are things that will and cannot be financed by the private sector. There's also things that poorer countries and middle-income countries will not be able to finance in the near to medium-term future. So ODA keeps being relevant. For example, also on things like global public goods, which we heard this morning, and climate, of course, is in a sense a global public good. But when we think about it that way, what we really have to keep in mind is that ODA is only a small part of the puzzle. So these are financial inflows into developing countries between 2000 and 2011, and the bar down here is ODA. And ODA has increased during that time, and actually keeps increasing despite sometimes a bit of a public sentiment that it isn't, but 2016 has seen the highest ever level of ODA. But other sources of finance, so this include FDI, this include other forms of investment, it includes remittances, which in many countries is becoming a hugely important source of finance. So ODA is a small part of that, and we have to think carefully about how can we use sort of this scarce resource, this money that is really here to attract other money into SDG relevant sectors. How can we use that? The second part of what we have to remember is the aid effectiveness agenda, which talks about that aid has to be spent in a transparent and an efficient manner, focusing on results and aligning with country systems. This is an agenda that was very big in the sort of the last decade. It sometimes gets a little bit forgotten at the moment, but we think this is still hugely important to really make sure that the quality of our ODA helps to contribute to the SDGs. So very quickly, I don't have a lot of time to go into how we as SDC work in partnerships, and we actually work in many different ways in partnerships. Again, please look at the beautiful posters out here, which is one example. But we have just sort of classified the way we work with the private sector, because we are not doing traditional PPPs. Again, we leave that to other actors, to the banks and so on. What we do is called public-private development partnerships, and these are much more in-depth partnerships with private sector actors, where we have a direct agreement with business, where we have a common set of objectives. We agree on some values, not all of them, and so this is very sort of a deep engagement that we have with private sector. We just did a analysis of our portfolio, and actually our minister wants to double our PPDPs over the next couple of years. And just as a small example, we work with Nestlé, a Swiss company you may have heard of, in Vietnam, where we joined forces with a research institute to measure the water usage of coffee growers, of smallholder coffee growers in Vietnam, and to address the water usage, to help them reduce the water usage. And sort of this is a case where there was an alignment of our interest to help smallholder farmers and to use water in a more efficient way, with the interest of Nestlé, which in this case, of course, has an interest in being able to keep the scarce resource water alive in what is its biggest producing markets for coffee worldwide. Another example, and this is what we call public-private development cooperation. So here we don't directly partner with a private business, but we support the local market in our country. So this project actually, it started in Cuba, of all places, but it has now been adapted in a number of Latin American countries, and where our direct partner is a Swiss university, and we help small producers of cement to reduce their carbon footprint by using a more efficient technology. So again, this is a project where it helps the partner because they can be more efficient in their production and therefore increasing their revenue, and it helps us as a development agency because there's a reduction of up to 40% in the production of cement, which is a huge contributor of CO2 emissions in many countries. We have plenty of other projects in most of our countries, but these, I just wanted to give you a bit of a flavor, sort of rounding up on what we do on the global level, at the policy level, what we are doing on the country level. With this, I thank you very much for your attention and wish you a pleasant day.